you know, this is your big opportunity. If you're in person, please come up to the podium if you have any questions, and you know, we'll get to your questions for sure. And it looks like we've got one already. So please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Catherine Beers. Can you hear me?
Hi, my name is Catherine Beers. I work at a local nonprofit and have a question about equity in renters. Given that a lot of the upgrades to be made are commercial or residential for homeowners, how is everyone here thinking about equity for low-income folks who aren't able to do it on their own as a renter? Thank you.
Yeah, equity. Well, from my perspective, it's definitely top of mind. If you are a local government, equity is a requirement in a lot of documents that we have to do for planning documents. So it's ingrained in a lot of issues. But how do we address it on the grid in terms of our customers, our low income customers? Is there any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Okay. So for
I don't think it's on. You got a green light or no?
It's flashing red and green.
Okay, let's see if we can get you a mic. Otherwise, people online will not hear you. All right, there we go. All right, perfect.
So for us on the distribution planning side, it really is the first in, first out for service application processes. So equity is not part of that in terms of fairness to all customers. We do treat them all the same. But I know that there are other parts of PG&E that are very concerned about equity and interactions and making sure that that there is representation and that communication, making sure that communities are aware of all the resources, but I really don't have a lot of information on what those are.
Yeah, and it is a challenge for local governments on my side for sure. And Stefanie, do you have anything in terms of what the CEC is doing on equity?
Yeah, so the CEC is doing a few things. Sorry. One of the biggest things that we're doing for equity right now, as far as building decarbonization, is we have an equitable building decarbonization program that's spinning up. It should be actually they're doing a roadshow right now. They're kind of going around the state, talking to people in different areas to finish the design of that program. But that's going to have several $100 million worth of direct install building, in buildings and low-income buildings, especially, and it's going to cover single-family, multifamily, and manufactured homes. There's also a lot of other equitable building, equitable research and work at the CEC. I don't know others off the top of my head, but I know I keep hearing about it going on. So thank you.
Yeah. So, let's make sure. There we go.
Okay, so I recall from my PG&E days that there's roughly 5.5 million electric customers. That means meters. Generally speaking, that's 4.5 million houses, something like that. 3 people to a house. And for PG&E, the number of customers on the CARE program is on the order of 1 million. And that kind of hit me over the head when I first started looking into those kinds of programs. But it's a rate discount program for people that meet certain income characteristics. And it's so that's 2.5, 3 million people, 1 million or so homes. Really a kind of a staggering thing when you think about it. And they get rate discounts based on income. So
yeah, and in terms of just equity from the local government perspective, there's all kinds of resources that are available for energy efficiency programs in general. And then I do believe PG&E does, in terms of reliability, they do try to, if they're going to do outages, it's related to certain customer bases. So they do address that in some. Is that correct, Jennifer? Have you? That's what I've heard. Yeah.
I'm not aware, but
Okay.
I apologize. I'll look into that.
Yeah, we can get back to you, but that's what I've heard is how they do that. So some communities might get their power turned off because they have less people that are more reliant on the need for power because of their situation. That's my understanding. In the past, that's how it's been done. I don't know how they're doing it right at the moment, but that's my understanding. Yeah. Is there any other questions in the room before I go online soon? And we've got a lot online, so I'm going to make sure we get to those too.
Hi, I'm John Sarter. I work for a company called Decibel, and we've just recently received certification for the first DC bidirectional charger in the USA. And there's more of these coming online. So I really want to ask what the utilities, what the CEC, what they're doing specifically to allow the proliferation of this technology for reduction of GHGs, for uptake of more renewable assets, and to load balance on the grid.
So I apologize. What was the technology?
Bidirectional EV charging.
Got it.
Yeah.
I know there are programs for it, but I don't know the specifics, so I apologize.
Anything from
Okay.
CEC?
Stephanie, do you have any
Yes,
information on that?
I have a little bit of information, and I know it's limited compared to what all is going on at the CEC, but there is a RFO out right now called Redwoods that's for connected EV chargers, just like you're describing. And I think there's quite a bit of money behind that for research and implementation. So I would suggest looking at that. And also, in general, in the reports and other things, we have been considering, EV charging, and there's a whole transportation division at the CEC that's much more up on this than I am.
Great, thank you.
Great. And I'll ask if you have a question, just come up towards the front here. We can make a line. And then what I'll do is I'm going to transition to our online questions. We have lots of questions, and I'm going to ask my colleague Ivana to come on and see what she's been looking online for questions for me.
Yeah, there's a lot going on over here. The first one I want to pose to panelists, actually to our speaker from PG&E. How might PG&E help promote more efficient electrification? So how might they team up with counties, CCAs, cities to encourage distribution, grid-friendly versions of retrofitting homes and buildings and putting in smarter, better-sized home EV chargers?
That's a great question, that partnership. There's probably lots of facets to that. For me, I come from the planning perspective. So for me, the partnership is figuring out when is the optimal time to charge that EV or run that appliance. And it's going to depend on that local grid. The system peak doesn't matter to the local distribution infrastructure. What you need to know is this circuit or this substation transformer peaks at 7 p.m. So don't charge your car at 7 p.m. So that time-based information for both the customer and utility is really critical. So I think people really need that information so they know when to not charge. And maybe the peak is at 2 p.m. So don't charge your car at 2 p.m. It's gonna depend. So I think that would be my answer, is just more information to people about what windows to stay out of so that we can effectively utilize that grid more and stay out of the peaks.
Yeah, that's great. And Stephanie, do you have anything to add to that, or?
Not specifically, I'm sorry.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure as I have you online. Ivana, I'm sure you've got more questions too.
Yeah, let's see. I'll mix these up a little bit. Can panelists speak to the role of solar and storage in the context of grid capacity and reliability? We've got a number of questions relating to that. So I'm trying to see if there's anything specific to tease out there. One is asking whether the CPUC could require load-serving entities to deploy batteries other load management resources targeted to those nodes where they are needed the most. And to add a separate sub-question to that, in case this helps our audience more. Are there now or in consideration in the future rate plans that would incentivize residential customers with batteries to supply energy to the grid in peak demand times? So we have interest about storage and its role on grid reliability, and then storage and its role in rate plans. Thank you.
Yeah, and let me pass it off to Stefanie to see if she has a general response to that, maybe.
Yeah, so as far as rate plans go, that was the purpose of the load management standard, is to require these sort of we call them marginal cost-based rates, but basically that means that the rates need to be based on what electricity costs and the maybe the social costs also of generating and delivering electricity. And that really is going to encourage people to add solar, and especially solar plus storage, in a way that they can take advantage of those rates, so that they can either reduce the amount of energy they use or actually put energy back up on the grid when it has the most value. So that's one of the main things that we're working on at the CEC. We also are working on encouraging solar adoption. As you know, the current code requires solar on new buildings, most new buildings. So that's worth considering as well. I think we are looking at storage in those kind of terms, not necessarily on the code terms, but as far as increasing adoption of storage, of energy storage, whether that's batteries or maybe thermal storage from things like water heaters or other approaches that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something that comes to mind for me particularly is when we are adding solar, or if you're saying everyone with these existing buildings is now going to solar, what does that mean for the grid? And is it going to be okay? I get a lot of those kinds of questions from the public at these public, like if you're okay, we're going to go all electric. Okay, well, what about, solar and battery, and how does that impact how the distribution of energy is moved around the state? And
so PV by itself can be problematic because it does have that lovely noontime peak, and you can overwhelm the system in the opposite direction. So if you have a new 30,000 home subdivision with PV on every roof and no battery storage at noon or 1 p.m., that's going to be a tremendous amount of energy onto the grid. With battery storage, it's taking, it's a much more beautiful situation. We don't have to build the infrastructure that we would have to build if it was PV alone. Now, PV alone can help in those areas where, like I said, we got commercial and we got industrial with no PV right now. So an example of that, in San Jose, we had a customer come to PG&E, 3 megawatts of new load. We were going to have to do some line upgrades. But then they looked at it and they said, oh, we're installing PV. We said, well, that coincides beautifully with the local peak. If you are trimming off your load, so you have no load at time of local peak, you have not added a megawatt to the system at time of peak. So that helps you. So once again, PV alone can help. It depends on where we're talking about. But with storage, it's really helping those areas right now that have an excess of PV, and it's all coming back onto the grid. And then at night we see, and this is true in like Clovis, if you think of the Fresno area, where when it's not so hot, my air conditioner's running, it turns off. Peter's air conditioner's running, it turns off, mine's running. We have that diversity of load. But then it gets to the 115-degree day and ours are just running solid. And you see that amazing peak after the sun goes down. Taking that down through battery storage, amazing, really amazing, and what needs to be done. So, yeah.
So I don't have all the facts in front of me here, but last fall when we had all the public service announcements about save load so the grid doesn't go down, and is the grid going to go down? And that was kind of a daily question, right? So just in the last few years, especially in Southern California, they've added, I think it's on the order of about 6 gigawatts of commercial storage. In other words, somebody builds a battery facility and uses energy, renewable energy, I think mostly, to charge that. And the peak last year was in something like 70 gigawatts or something of that nature. And if you have several gigawatts of storage that can be pumped into the grid to prevent it from going down, that matters. And so, but 5 years ago, there would have been maybe 0 effectively commercial size storage. So building these commercial size storage facilities and having that available as a quote power plant is crucial, and probably was contributed to saving us from a meltdown last fall. So.
Yeah, and Stefanie, from the CEC's perspective on the battery storage, is there anything that CEC is doing to help, get people more educated, workforce, anything to kind of, because it's kind of new, really, really new. And, when you talk to contractors, these are for me, on the ground, on the boots, like what the issues are, the cost for people to do this stuff if they want to do it, and what incentives are there, and how's the state handling that?
Yeah, I wish I could talk more about this. It's not my specialty. So I know that we do have, workforce education programs that where we support that. And we have a lot of battery research going on as far as how to connect those to the grid most effectively, how to communicate with them. One of the things that batteries can do is a lot of grid support that's not necessarily just running the energy when it needs to be, but they can also, do other grid support that's necessary for especially localized grid needs, when there's a local peak or a local dip in voltage, things like that. So I know there's a lot of research and activity going on those fronts at the CEC, but I can't direct you to particular things. If you have questions, feel free to reach out and I will find the right person. But.
Great. And Ivana, I'll transition to you for maybe one more question, maybe 2 more if I'm lucky, from you over there on Zoom.
Sure, yeah. So there's a lot of questions coming in about average timelines for service drop upgrades. Can you provide, and I think this would go maybe to a few folks here, but can you provide some insight into the average timelines for service drop upgrades to single family homes and multifamily homes? What is the reason? What are some of the reasons for the long lead times? And one question I wanted to emphasize within this realm is, what levers might regional government and cities, counties use to collaborate with PG&E to move some of these approvals more quickly?
All right. So my understanding, and it varies across the system based on resources, is 6 to 12 months for the service upgrades. And experiences may be longer than that depending on where you are. And that has to do with both our design and our construction resources, especially at the beginning of this year, the storms that we had and a lot of the infrastructure damage that we took. We've just gotten back from that. So a lot of design and construction resources were doing that. And then of course, a lot of it is dedicated to wildfire hardening and undergrounding of lines. So that being the primary focus has really shifted some of these timelines longer. Definitely.
Okay. Ivana, do you have another question?
Yeah, there's a sub-question related to that. Could PG&E integrate expected load into planning and start siting and upgrading resources before interconnection is requested?
So yes, that's part of where we need to team up is we have that IPER forecast. So the CEC gives us that growth forecast, but where we put it definitely depends on who's growing, where is the growth going to happen, where's the electrification going to happen. So that's part of getting that information onto our map where we disaggregate. The IPER is just a system level forecast. It doesn't tell us put it over in this city instead of this city. That's where our local information really helps. So knowing that we've got some areas that have just been annexed and are going to go develop, or this is going to be industrial, or we think that the use of this area will change, having that information and being able to put it into the planning process is really valuable for us.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one thing I'm taking away from this, especially as a local government, as a planner, is going, you know, when we do our CEQA, we're like, oh no, it's PG&E, they're obligated to serve, and that they're going to make sure it's. I'm hearing a little bit different story from today, and saying, hey, we actually need to make sure we're coordinating with PG&E on these larger projects and making sure that they're aware that they're coming through the pipeline, that they're going through the CEQA process, or even when they're earlier on in the application process, that PG&E is probably, you know, they know that these are down, so they can plan for them, because a lot of the CEQA projects take many, many years. So that's something I think I got out of this, and I'll be going to my planning department and going, what are you guys doing with CEQA in terms of that? So, yeah, great. And we have a question, and I'm hoping it's not the last one. We've got few minutes left here in person. Thank you.
All right, thank you. My name is Jessica, and I'm working with a team to educate and promote whole home electrification. So this is more on the consumer end. What I'm curious about is, especially with IRA rebates rolling out end of this year, beginning of next year, what that load is like I'm unsure of magnitude, right? Say a bunch of people start opting into home electrification, getting heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, induction stoves, and say that they have the panel that can handle it in their own home. I'm curious about the grid at large. You know, is there capacity for that? Is that something being planned for, or in the grand scheme of things, our appliances not so much of a drain, I guess, is my question. And then in terms of those who do adopt, to someone's earlier point about rates and how, okay, as more electricity is being used and less gas, you know, as folks who can afford purchasing new electric appliances are using less gas, those who might still be with gas, like renters, Catherine had that point about equity before. Yeah, like I'm just curious about that whole dynamic and what of your work relates to this dynamic.
So the second part, I think, I don't know if Peter, you wanted to talk about how the load factor kind of will affect rates going forward. It's not on an individual customer basis, though. It's really as a whole grid. I don't know if you...
Well, my basic point about the gas grid is we reduce all this gas load, you still have the fixed cost of operating the pipes. And that isn't really going to be affected by how much gas goes through it generally. So that will be a huge upward driver. And of course, the thought is the wealthier people can make the changes before the less wealthy people can. And that's, you know, manifestly true. So that's just an issue that needs to be solved, and it needs to involve the CPUC, the utilities, all of you guys, you know, bringing attention to the issue and coming up with a solution for it somehow.
Absolutely.
One other thing on appliances is, as we electrify, what's going to be really important is that we avoid wherever possible and at all costs using electric resistance for anything, and always using a heat pump. And it's one of those things where I think I barely got a B in thermodynamics in engineering school. It was because of thermodynamics. But the thing to remember is 3. It's 3 times more efficient to use a heat pump for water heating or space heating or for anything else than it is to use resistance. And that a heat pump water heater really uses like 1,000 kilowatt hours a year. A resistance water heater uses 3,000. So 1,000 kilowatt hours a year, that's 3 a day, right? So that's not a big deal. Everybody putting in 3,000 is a big deal. So those appliances really matter. On the AC side, on the heat pump side, you know, many houses already have air conditioning. So yes, you're changing when the peak is, but you're not affecting necessarily, at least at the site, you're not affecting how much power can be delivered to the site because it's already sized for an air conditioner. So I'll just say those things.
Thank you.
And to your point about the other part, the first part of the question, the planning for electrification. So we do have that IPER forecast, which does have an electrification component that is disaggregated to the system, and we plan for that. But really, we've got the heating is a winter peaking thing. And right now the system is really peaking in the summer. So we really do need to take it into account what that winter is going to look like and plan for that really cold night. Because otherwise there will be difficulties on the system.
Thank you.
Yeah, one last question. This will be the last question.
I was very curious, just of all the good discussion today, Chris brought Mitsubishi, putting my old program person hat on, given all the great things that have been discussed and things like disadvantaged communities and equity and how some of these different funding initiatives are going to line up with those things from a socioeconomic perspective. From folks who are working more on the utility side, what are the things local government folks should be thinking about in terms of messaging, working with different communities from that geo perspective, and where certain communities or certain service drops might be better targeted for upgrades or might run into issues with upgrades in terms of lead times or things like that? Because there's going to be a lot of money coming down the pipe and there's going to be a lot of investment made. I think you want to make those in places where folks are going to get traction in terms of moving projects forward. So how can local governments and the utilities work to kind of overlay these maps with the big outreach that's going to be coming down the pipe?
So part of it may be being aware in your cities about where the biggest cost is going to be. So who's got the small panels? Who's got the direct buried services? Drops. Those are really going to be expensive to replace. Who's got normal stuff? So I think part of that would be aware of where the costs are going to likely be the highest and for whom and for which parts of the community. That may be something that we really need to know.
Yeah, and I'll just add, if you're a local government and you're looking at trying to do this stuff, you really got to start doing some research on those issues, like what age of the homes were built, doing some legwork to get an idea and concept of kind of what the impacts could be for existing buildings in particular. New construction is fairly straightforward. You can project how many homes or businesses you're getting over a certain time of period, but when it comes to existing buildings, you have to look at where the low amperage panel upgrades are for residential, when, how many homes are being sold in the area for turnover, because that's when they're most likely to do those changes, like myself. I'm currently getting a home. So those are some of the issues that come up. But at the end of the day, I think what I can say for like closing remarks on this is the state, the CEC is doing a ton of planning. PG&E is doing what they're obligated to do generally across the board, our utility, to try to address these issues. But as local governments, what can you do? I think was what I wanted to get out of this. And it's like, understand what your housing stock is. What are the things we can advocate for our disadvantaged communities? What resources can we provide for them, long term, so that if we can get those disadvantaged communities or impacted communities, if we can crack that, now we can do everything else. I think that's part of what my thoughts have always been. And it's just moving us forward into something where, when we have a conversation, things don't stop because we're concerned about the grid. The state's doing a ton of stuff, PG&E is doing a ton of stuff, and we just need to acknowledge those things and get the talk to the people who've gone through some of these issues that come up when it comes to building electrification and work together as a team. But I'll leave it at that, and we can go on to the next the last bit of our slides. I think my computer just died over here, so I'm looking over at the computer on the side here. Great. So thank you so much for today. Appreciate everyone online. I know we did not get to all your questions or even close to all of your questions online. I apologize for that. But if you have any questions for us individually from the panelists, please reach out to us. We'll have our contact information. You can always reach out to us on that, and we'll be happy to connect with you. Thank you again for all your time. Appreciate everyone.